What's going on, guys? Marco here with Dynasty Nerds, and I am bringing you my early wide receiver rookie rankings. Part 1, Part 2 will be out next week, but we've got a ton of players to break down. Before we jump in, I want to remind you, use the link in the description below. Get 15% off joining the Nerd Herd. Get an extra episode of the podcast. Get specialized Dynasty rankings. Get so much extra content that you are going to be the only person with the competitive edge in your Dynasty leagues for the price of a cup of coffee a day. Use the link in the description below and get that edge. I want to jump in and start with my number 1 wide receiver. Right now, he is in a tier of his own, but the guy who is next on this list is eking closer and closer to that tier. I'm still breaking down more tape. Obviously, Combine will help. Draft Capital will help. But we will see where these guys land. I want to mention before I dive into, we don't know official height and weight. I might mention it here or there, but it's not something to really stick to right now. If the size is a major advantage or disadvantage or something like that, I will mention it. But until we get those official Combine measurements, really, we're not going to dive too much into he's 6'3" or he's 5'10", because we don't know the answer right now. We've just got their college measurements, and those are notoriously inaccurate. So let's jump to the number 1 guy, and it is Jaxon Smith-Njigba, and he is out of, obviously, Ohio State. He didn't play a ton this year. He was dealing with an injury, but last year he was a phenom, and he is one of those guys similar to Jamar Chase where people see him, he explodes onto the scene, he's an elite player at the college level, and then you got some time away and recency bias takes over and you're like, man, is he that good? You haven't seen him on the field. The reality is he is. Do not make that mistake where he is off the field and you just forget about this guy. Jaxon Smith-Njigba is an incredible route runner. He's got awesome hands. He's a big-time playmaker. His run after the catch ability is incredible, and he has one of the highest football IQs of this entire wide receiver class. I think he might actually have the highest. There's only 2 other guys that are really in that conversation. We'll talk about them in this video. Okay, what is the negative here for Jaxon Smith-Njigba? Why are people starting to doubt him outside of his, time away from the football field? The only real knock on him is he does not have that elite athleticism. He doesn't have the breakaway speed. He is not some big, strong guy. He's, kind of the new exciting wide receiver prototype where he's like a Quentin Johnston, a Brandon Ayuk size-wise. He's in the smaller to mid-range size. His weight isn't something that's going to really be, okay, he's a sturdy, strong guy, but he does all of the football fine-tuning key parts of being a true wide receiver really well. His wide receiver IQ is through the roof. Tier 1 ends there. Again, it might change, but for now, that's where it ends. Tier 2 starts with wide receiver out of USC, Jordan Addison. There is a ton of things to like. He could climb into that tier 1 with JSN, but right now, here's what you need to know about Addison. Route running, he checks that box. Playmaking, he checks that box. He is really incredible he has really incredible run after the catch ability. He is one of those guys who, with the ball in his hands, he is dangerous. His release package right now looks like it's a plus trait for him. Now, we're going to see a little bit more of what his intangibles can bring to that, and really if he can continue to do that at the NFL level, because a big knock for Addison is his size. He doesn't have, the size of, similar to JSN, but even smaller, of these prototypical guys like a Julio Jones or a Calvin Johnson, things like that. He's a smaller frame guy. Honestly, he reminds me a lot of Calvin Ridley. He doesn't have elite speed, but what he lacks in speed and size, he makes up for in football IQ, route running, run after the catch ability, playmaking, and just being a really smart player overall. I think run blocking obviously will be a concern for a guy of his size, but it's not as big of a concern where I'm willing to knock him out of my top 2 wide receivers. Next wide receiver on my list is out of TCU, Quentin Johnston, and he is the opposite of the first 2 guys. He is that prototypical size wide receiver. He is a big-bodied guy. He plays to his size. He doesn't play small like another guy that we have on this list that we'll talk about in a little bit. I think one of the things that's really special about Johnston is that he puts together his size speed package really well. He is a short route runner, phenom. He's elite at the short route running. Now, there is a knock when you look at his intermediate to long routes where he's just not really He's kind of stiff in his hips. He doesn't really settle into his routes, and so he kind of rounds out routes, every now and again, and that is a concern for me. He doesn't have a ton of years of production, which is a knock, on a lot of these guys, really, but Quentin Johnston is one that I think it is of concern. Obviously, he's coming out of TCU. I think the other thing for Johnston is his release package. He was not really asked to do a ton when it came to getting off the line and what his release really looked like. So that is going to be a concern. I think of the top 3 guys, because this is the end of a tier right now for me, of these top 3 guys, Quentin Johnston has the highest ceiling, but he also has the lowest floor. There's one other player that I really like, and he's going to be at the end of this video, who I think might climb even higher than Quentin Johnston once the draft ends, and we'll see about that. But I want to end the tier there. Let's jump to the next tier, which is only one player alone, and it is an interesting player. He kind of stands out from the pack in a lot of ways. He's a little bit different. It's Josh Downs out of UNC. Now, where Downs is different than the rest of the guys on this group, I think everyone in this group can play kind of on the outside. They can play the slot. They can be moved all around the formation. Josh Downs isn't that. He's going to have to play in the slot as a wide receiver. His frame is just smaller, even smaller than, the Jordan Addisons of the world. But that is okay because he is going to be a slot phenom. He is one of the safer picks, even with his smaller size. He's one of the safer picks in this draft class at the wide receiver position. I truly believe that. When I look at Josh Downs, there's a lot of things to like. He's a playmaker. He's a phenomenal route runner. He's actually really, really successful, even though he is a smaller wide receiver in contested catch situations. He plays much bigger than his size is. And of course, one of the things that has kind of been a staple of a lot of these guys ahead of him, instead of maybe Quentin Johnston, is that his football IQ is through the roof. When he gets the ball in his hands, he is special. He finds the holes. He knows the moves to make. He is a very, very impressive player. Honestly, we could be seeing a smaller version of a prime Jarvis Landry as a potential outcome for a guy like Josh Downs. I really, really love this player. Next tier has 2 players. It's my final 2 players for the video. And the guy who I want to mention first here is a guy who right now is projected to go in like the late 3rd, early 4th round. I expect that he climbs into the early 3rd, maybe even end of the 2nd, and he will be a steal, I think, at that value. The player I'm talking about is out of Iowa State. He is a Cyclone. It's Xavier Hutchinson. He is one of my, if not my, favorite under-the-radar skill player in this entire draft. When you watch Xavier Hutchinson's tape, there's not a ton that you can really knock the player for. He has incredible size-speed combination. Right now, he's around like 6'3", 210 is what he's listed. Wouldn't be surprised if he's a little bit shorter, but 6'3", 210 is what's listed right now. The size looks evident. He plays big on the football field. He makes aggressive catches. He makes acrobatic catches. I think he, along with JSN, probably have the 2 highest football IQs of all the wide receivers in this class. His wide receiver IQ for a big body player like him who is really athletic is really, really impressive. He isn't kind of like what Sean Tucker is to the running backs, where his athleticism is kind of what he leans on. He can do that if he wanted to. But the thing with Xavier Hutchinson, the thing that makes me think that he is going to be a special talent at the NFL level is he is not only an athletic, physically gifted player, but he is a smart player. He is very, very creative with his route running. He's done a lot of really creative things with his release package. Even if it isn't incredible elite, it's very, very good, especially for a player of his size and athleticism. The other really impressive thing about Xavier Hutchinson is that his body control is incredible. He does really, really acrobatic and crazy catches while he's in midair to catch the ball. And I would honestly say if you look at some of Xavier Hutchinson's highlights, not just his tape, but his actual highlights, he will probably be one of the guys that you think makes some of the most acrobatic catches in all of college football. He's that impressive as a physical wide receiver at the college level. Now, when you think of the few things that there are to knock on Xavier Hutchinson, one of them is kind of an issue with a lot of these guys outside of maybe JSN and Addison. He has concentration drops. I know I just talked about how he is one of those guys who makes these crazy acrobatic catches, and he does. But sometimes the really simple catches, he gets ahead of himself, he starts looking downfield, takes his eyes off where the ball is located, and has these concentration drops that just shouldn't be happening. He needs to shore those up for sure, but it's not a concern enough where I think he is warranted to drop to where he's currently being projected to be drafted in the NFL draft. The other thing is that his run blocking for a guy of his size is inconsistent. He shows some flashes of the run blocking being good, but he's not, the premier run blocker of a big body wide receiver like him. George Pickens is one of those guys you think of is a very impressive run blocker for a wide receiver of his size, and Xavier Hutchinson just isn't that. He could build that into his game as if he adds strength, if he adds a little muscle after being in the NFL for a little bit. We'll see what happens there, but right now I can't stress this enough. Xavier Hutchinson, currently as my wide receiver 5, he could skyrocket up draft boards. I think he could end up jumping into that second tier of wide receivers for me once it's all said and done. The last guy I want to talk about is Kayshon Boutte out of LSU. He is an incredible wide receiver. A lot of people thought he would be actually one of the best, if not the best, JSN aside, wide receivers in this class. There was some questions, and he wanted to stay in college. There was maybe something that happened off the field that got him in trouble, and they got LSU in trouble, so he is now back in the draft this year, which is exciting for the draft class as a whole. But when you really dive into his tape, there's some concerns that I have with Boutte's play. And so let's talk about the pros first, and then we'll dive into some of the red flags. When it comes to being, an athletic playmaker, I've mentioned that on a couple of these guys on this list, and I think that's really important to a degree. But that's really a big-time strength of Boutte. He's got really incredible elusiveness and speed combination. Some of the footwork he does when he's got the ball in his hand is really, really impressive. And that's why he's such an incredible playmaker and was an incredible playmaker for the Tigers. His run after the catch ability is probably only behind Addison when you look at this class. But like I said, Xavier Hutchinson isn't similar to Sean Tucker. I think that Boutte might be similar, where he might rely a little bit more on his athleticism and his physical giftings than a lot of the other wide receivers in this class. I mean, almost like Quentin Johnston, but Quentin Johnston has a little bit more wide receiver IQ, I think, than Boutte does. What I've noticed is that he's not very technically proficient. His footwork is weird. Sometimes he does weird things with his hands. His wide receiver IQ as a whole isn't where it should be for a premier talent, and that's why I have him at my wide receiver 6 in this class. He is a guy who, if he tests really, really well, which I kind of expect him to, will help him in the draft. And of course, that will help his overall prospect profile. But he's just got a couple other questions, with those things added to the fact that for a guy of his size and his athleticism, he weirdly struggles in contested catch situations. His catch radius is much smaller than it should be, where Josh Downs is a guy who plays much bigger than his size. Boutte might be a guy who plays a little bit smaller than his size. It's not necessarily going to be a major flaw in his game, I don't think, but he could be someone who is a little bit slower to come on, even in his rookie season, maybe his sophomore season, depending on where he lands. We'll find out more when his prospect profile fills out. I think Boutte and Johnston are the two on this list who might drop for me a little bit. And Xavier Hutchinson and Josh Downs are the two guys I would say are values. They could move up. And right now, if you look at where these guys are probably going in your rookie drafts, if you're drafting right now, which I would say wait, but if for some reason you are, I think Xavier Hutchinson's probably a guy you can get at the end of the second in your rookies, maybe in the third round of your rookie drafts, depending on Superflex or not. Josh Downs is a guy that you might be able to snag at the end or the beginning of your second round, maybe at the end of your first, but either way, that's a value, I think, if you're getting him in the second. Josh Downs is a very impressive player. And for me, JSN, I want to just stress this. Right now, he's in my tier 1 of wide receivers. He is really close to being draftable over Jahmyr Gibbs when I look at all the skill players. I'm not 100% there yet, but it could happen once we get closer and closer to the draft. All right, well, let me know your thoughts, your questions, your concerns. Drop your comments below. Part 2 is going to come out next week. Hope you guys love this, and I cannot wait to bring you part 2. Don't forget to be kind, do good, and we'll see you next time. Peace.